Hello and welcome to another episode from Restoration DIY. It's great to have you here and I hope you enjoyed the video. This time I'll be making a vase from 4 pieces of yew cast in 4-colour epoxy resin. Without further ado, let's get into it. Lately it seems that every project I start begins on the bandsaw, and this one is no exception. This is a piece of yew that's been on the shelf for over 2 years. I often look at it with no idea what to do with it, but this time it was perfect for what I had in mind. After cutting it in half and removing an errant stalk, I drilled a hole in each one for the locating pin on the circle cutting jig. The position of the hole was such that the finished blank would have a lot of relief in it. I'll just show one of the pieces being cut to fit the casting bucket. It's important to get a tight fit because it'll cut down on the amount of epoxy resin I'll need to mix, and it keeps the finished piece as big as possible. After a series of straight cuts, I finished by rotating the blank through the blade, and that was it done. A quick check to make sure the 2 pieces fit the bucket, and then it was on to the unpleasant task of removing the loose outer layers. Most of the bark had been previously removed. The brass wheel just created a lot of nasty, horrible dust that covered everything. And yes, I was wearing my Air Shield Pro. Dusty job done, I could get on with the casting. As usual, I waxed a bucket to aid in the cured blank removal, then I added a spacer to keep the 2 pieces apart. And that brings me on to this week's sponsor, my favourite brand of epoxy resin, T-Expert. They offer a range of products for all your needs, and this time I'll be using the Deep Pour. You'll find a link to the website and a 10% discount code in the video description. The chosen colours this time are red, purple, yellow and copper. A strange mix, but I'm trying to get a multicoloured marble effect. So let's see how it goes. But to be honest, I was hesitant about the yellow. Should I or shouldn't I? In the end, I thought, what the hell? And in it went. What's the worst that could happen? Well, as it turned out, one of the bad things you can do is mix a darker colour before you get to the yellow. Even after spinning the excess off the mixing paddle, there was enough red residue to taint the bright yellow into a mucky orangey mess. First time that's happened, so that's another lesson learned. After mixing each batch for a minimum 2 minutes each, I used the mucky yellow to prime the 2 pieces of yew. I lathered it on using my nitrile gloved hands, leaving enough of a layer that it would hopefully show up in the finished casting. A while later, the yellow and copper had pre-cured enough that they were beginning to gel, so into the casting it all went, though not without a small panic. I'd added another old segment to create more space between the 2 pieces of yew, and now it was obvious that it was too much, so I had to remove it. It took some doing, but I managed to snap it off. Then I put a single segment back and hoped it wouldn't move to the edge. The rest of the epoxy was added, then it went into the pressure pot to cure for the next few days. It's 2 days later and the resin has cured with no visible cracks or voids. It's still a bit soft, but I was confident it would be okay to work with it. I marked the centre and drilled a couple of holes for the woodworm screw and the live centre, and then it was over to the lathe. The blank was firmly attached to the lathe, then I turned the speed up to around 700 RPM and I got straight into removing the outer layers of resin. For this, I used a negative rate carbide. When I first cast this blank, I was unsure what the piece was going to be. I thought about a hollow form, but I've done one recently. Then I considered a footed bowl, but I was strangely drawn to doing another tall vase. I didn't have enough time to make a resin jointed segmented base and top, so it'd have to be solid wood. I have some sapele mahogany and some oak, but the contrasting timbers didn't seem to go well with each other. Then I remembered I had some lumps of yew in a scraps box, and these would be perfect. The blank was very well balanced, but I wanted to get down to the timber to see what the colours looked like, and I was very pleasantly surprised. The 4 colours had created a marbled effect. One side had green and yellow highlights, and the other had copper. With that exposed, I cut away some excess resin from the underside and faced it off, ready to bond the base in place. I knew I wouldn't be able to hide the joint, so I decided to enhance it with a 3D printed spacer, making an obvious line between the base and the midsection. This was bonded on both sides with 5-minute epoxy mixed with black mica powder. Liberal amounts of epoxy were spread over the joints and the parts were sandwiched together on the lathe, using the tailstock to apply a suitable amount of pressure. A few minutes later, the joint was cured enough for me to begin rough turning the base into shape. For this, I used a 3/8 bowl gouge. What I'm doing for a start is turning away the excess until I get down to solid timber. This will determine the maximum width on the joint, which will in turn dictate how the shape will develop. And to be honest, at this point, I was wondering if there would be enough material to work with. Having mostly got down to solid timber, I began reducing the midsection so I could blend the two pieces together, but early on I made a bit of a mistake. I allowed the gouge to cut in fairly deep just below the black spacer ring, so I quickly moved down to the lower section to make a start on the cutout just above the base. As with some of my other projects, I had to be careful not to remove too much. I still have the inside to hollow out, and I'll need to leave a lot of strength in the base to prevent any mishaps. Snapping the foot off wouldn't be a good thing. A little bit more and the basic shape was roughed in. Now I could cut the mortise. I wanted a good strong mortise, so I cut this one a bit bigger than I normally would. The 1/4" parting tool defined the outer edge and did a bit of clean up. The bowl gouge took care of the rest. Then the dovetail cutter cut the dovetail. Nearly done. Tail stuck out the way. I cut away the last little bit, then I sanded to 400 grit and added a wax finish. I turned the blank around and got it securely mounted on the 4-jaw chuck. Then to get the hollowing out started, I drilled the centre out with a 75mm Forstner bit. I could have used a bigger Forstner bit, but I wanted to keep as much of the top surface as I could for when I bonded the top section in place. I cut down into the blank, through the top section, through the resin, and about 30mm, 1.25" into the lower midsection. Now we're properly into the hollowing out, and with no messing about, I got straight in with a side cutting scraper. Once it got started there was no stopping it. I really did want to take a lot out to reduce the overall weight, and access was really good, so there wasn't any need to rotate the headstock out towards me. I tried a lot of different camera angles to see if I could get some better video, but with such a small opening and my hands in the way, there just isn't anything to see, so I'm going to skip ahead to when it's more or less hollowed out. It's 90 minutes later and the last bit is being done, after which I sanded the inside to 400 grit. Sanding done, I could bond the top section in place. As with the base section, I used 5-minute epoxy mixed with black mica powder and a 3D printed spacer to define the joint. It looks like a rough piece of timber, but I promise you, there is a rim and a neck in there somewhere. A number of minutes later, and I began roughing out the top section. The 3/8 bowl gouge was best for this, cutting away the bark to leave clean, solid timber. I kept going until the side was flush top to bottom. Then I removed the rough stuff on the top, being careful not to undermine the live centre. The shape that appeared had me wishing I had a threading jig. It would have been more work, but to me, that looked like it was made for a screw on top. Anyway, perhaps in the future I'll get the jig. Until then, I'll continue with a more simple idea. The midsection was next. Cutting a slight angle up into the neck created the transition I was looking for. Then I moved on to cutting a cove. The shape was coming together nicely, but to better see how it looked, I needed to flatten the top. So carefully I used a 3/8 bowl gouge to remove the material, then the blade dug in and levered the workpiece clean off the chuck. This caught me by surprise, but luckily there wasn't any damage. I refixed it to the lathe and used a small pull saw to remove the last little nubbins. Then, whilst I was at it, I drilled a 75mm hole through the top section into the void of the midsection. Now the top had a hole in it, I could use the bullnose live centre. Its real job is to hold onto tubes and pipes on engineering lathes, but it suits this purpose just fine. With the vase securely clamped to the lathe, I continued shaping the upper section. The carbide was creating some tear out, and cutting coves with a gouge is a relatively new thing to me, but how hard can it be? After a touch up on the Tormek, I began slicing into the timber, first one way, then the other. It was all going great. Then I got a minor catch. Nothing to worry about, I thought to myself. I'm almost done. Just a few more cuts and I'll be finished. I just needed a good cut, then I could call it. But these didn't quite do it, so I'll just do one more. I'll switch to normal speed so you can enjoy the moment. Bloody thing. Absolutely trashed it. The joys of wood turning, and I had indeed trashed the rim. But after a moment's reflection, there was only one thing to do, and that is to fix it. Though with the neck thickness down to around 8mm, I had to be careful. I did one more pass with a gouge and shear scraped most of the damaged edge away. Playing it safe, I used a freshly sharpened small negative rake scraper to refine the cove and blend it into the midsection, and the skew took care of tidying up the rim. nail passed with a skew, and that was the outside done. Well, almost. In a moment you'll see a change in the base. I did some work to add some detail cutting a step into the foot, but I can't find the footage for that bit anywhere. So having done it, I sanded with 80 grit, then I moved on to the mouth of the rim. This really is a butt-clenching moment. The vase is only supported by the 4-jaw chuck. It has a good grip, but there's a lot of weight hanging on it. I definitely need a steady rest. Anyway, this had to be done. Using the negative rate carbide, I very carefully and very slowly stripped away the waste material. This didn't take too long. The U is easy to work with, and so with a swipe of the skew to remove the tool marks, it was done. I sanded just the inside of the rim and the neck, then added a wax finish. Also, if you're wondering, the day after I mixed some epoxy resin and poured it into the vase and rolled it around to coat all the surfaces, and this was left to cure. With the life centre back in place supporting the vase, I could sand the outside from 80 to 600 grit and up to 3000 grit just on the midsection. Then I cleaned down with denatured alcohol. This was followed up with 2 liberal coats of sanding sealer, each one denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. And up next, Yorkshire grit. A single application, thoroughly cleaned away until no more residue is picking up on the paper towel. Then the resin polishing. First, Mercopolar Shine 10, a single coat, polished and cleaned away, ready for the next stage. Polar Shine 5, 1 coat, polished off to leave a deep shine. And to finish, Hampshire Sheen Gloss Finishing Wax, 2 coats, buffed to seal and protect the surface. That's it, another project finished. And what a project it was. When it began, I had no idea it would look like this, but I'm really happy with it, and I hope you like it too. The 4-colour epoxy worked nicely with the distinct colours on either side, and adding the black line between the sections helps to break up the U. Anyway, with all that said, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, a thumbs up will be greatly appreciated, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.